My practice has been centred on the stadium for quite some time now, a few years. I'm interested in the stadium as a unique space within the urban centre. And probably I've used a bit of Foucault's heterotopian ideas, but I'm more interested in what happens as the stadium as a space that is differentiated from the rest of the city. A space where sort of contrasting and ambiguous things happen. It's sort of everything and nothing. It's an empty space for most of the week, and then suddenly it fills up at various times. It's a space where public and private come together, where rebellion and conformity come together. So it's got all these different elements to it. So it's been the centrepiece, if you like, of my practice. How that manifests has been a little bit differently, primarily in a video practice with found footage, so video montage, if you like, or collage from found footage. And then often in another piece, whether it be a panel or a banner or merchandise. So riffing off some of the sort of aesthetics of the stadium. Like a lot of people in Melbourne, I enjoy the football. I go to the football, and for 8 years I worked at the MCG. I was a safety manager at the MCG, and it was probably in that role that the first narrative that I used in my first stadium work came out of, and that narrative was as the safety manager, I did the emergency plans, and I was at a training course for that, and the story was that that in 1991, Coode Island, you'd be too young for this, but in 1991, Coode Island had a big explosion, a big St Elmo's fire, and Coode Island's just down off the Footscray area in the bay down there, and big plumes of smoke went across the city, and so the story was that emergency services decided to evacuate people from the housing estate, and so the police went round and knocked on everyone's doors and said, get into the bus, we're driving you to the evacuation centre, which was North Melbourne Footy Ground, Arden Street Oval, yeah? And so they did that, put everyone in the bus, and the story was, on the way to the stadium, some people jumped out the bus and ran away, and they were like, what was that about? Don't know what that's about. And it transpired that these people had migrated from Chile many years before. And of course, if you're old like me, you remember that in '73, during the Pinochet coup, on the day of the coup, or the day after the coup, the police went round to everyone's houses, knocked on their doors, put them in the bus, and then took them to the football stadium, where they were then incarcerated and tortured, and terrible things happened in that stadium. So I had these two stadiums. I had Arden Street Oval, and I had Estadio Nacional in Chile, and this weird connection that came from something that happened 20 years later. All right, so that story's been partially what ignited all of this, but I suppose it's expanded out of that, and I'm interested in the nature of the stadium as a more of a meta-narrative of something about the 20th century. So, because the stadium has been, you know, that sort of side of fascist politics. It's perfectly, the aesthetics of the stadium is perfect for that, but it's perfect for the full-on capitalist ideals as well, as we see particularly now with the stadium. So what happens to the stadium past this point is interesting too, because it may in fact be that the stadium's on a demise. So it's sort of like this, it feels like a metaphor for the 20th and half of the 21st century. On a side point perhaps, that if you think of the stadium's either ancient, so there were ancient stadiums in Greece and Rome, they're not much in between. Basically that gap, in the medieval times, it got filled, that requirement got filled by the church, yeah? And then as the world became more secular, the stadium reignited its position in the world in the sort of late 1800s, and the 20th century just saw this amazing proliferation of stadiums around. You can't be a city without at least one, if not 10 major stadiums, yeah? But maybe the stadium won't be there in 30, 40, 50 years as virtual spectatorship starts to take over. Something else happens. There's two things with this work. But first of all, I'll talk about the particular bit of footage, which is the pig banner footage, which is from a game. Legia Warsaw is a Polish team, and they were in the UEFA Champions League, and they lost a game. Well, they won the game 6-1, but because of a bureaucratic anomaly, they had the decision reversed, so they were kicked out. So in a protest to the authorising body, they have this amazing banner that covers the entire end of the stadium, and the chant, they're quite renowned for their chanting and whatever. And then of course, as they chant, this amazing fireworks display of flares goes off around the amazing pig banner. And it's just it's a classic symbol of the ambiguity of the stadium. So you've got this, if you like, local team, local people, little people protesting a bureaucratic decision, using the pig motif for that. But of course, Legia Warsaw have a notorious history. They've got some real problems with white supremacy type ideology within the team, or within the supporter group, sorry. And so you've got this dichotomy of where you think, okay, they're protesting an authority, but on the other side, I certainly don't feel any affinity to this group of people. So that's a nice sort of play on that, I suppose, or an interesting position of where the stadium fits for that. The other thing with this work is it's a riff straight off Foucault's Heterotopias. So Foucault, in The Order of Things, uses a Borges short story, a list of animals from a fictitious Chinese encyclopedia, and the list is absurd. It lists animals, the catalogue of animals, as either being stray dogs belonging to the emperor, drawn with a camel hair brush, for instance. So I in part wanted to do that with the stadium, that it can be this space of almost secular spiritualism, rebellion, but then fascism, capitalism, authority. It can be a prison, it can be a theatre, it can be a circus, So it has this ability to morph through all these different forms, and so that's the 14 chapters of the video are in fact a riff off Borges's list of animals out of his short story. The panels are digital prints of air shots of various stadia, most of which feature in the video. But what I'm interested in is that aerial shot of the stadium as this sort of cut-out space. Actually, I was reading something yesterday about the word temenos, I think has an origins which means cathedral, but it also has its root word comes from to cut out. And that's when you look at an aerial shot of a city, the stadium particularly is a cutout of space. And it comes back to what I was saying before too. It's quite amazing that in an urban environment where land and in a capitalist city is so highly valued, that you have that amount of land that is empty for six, in our case, 6 days of the week. But for some cities, those stadiums might only have a game every 2 or 3 weeks, right? So they might actually be empty for 3 weeks and then have one event, and this cutout, and it fits back into Foucault's heterotopian idea about that these things are they're exclusive. These spaces are exclusive. They're penetrable, but they've got an exclusiveness about them. And this is something about the stadium, that it's egalitarian, but you have to be a member to get in. Like there's this play on that space, that this is a public space. If we think of our own stadiums, they're public spaces, except you need to be a member to get into the space. And when I say member, it might be a financial in our case, but if you want to be in Legia Warsaw's display, you have to be a member of their ideas and their ideology as well. So you need something to get into that space, yeah? So there's this sort of play on that. So I'm very interested in the cutout, the idea of this space. It's the heterotopia so distinctively physically manifested. If you look down, it's literally cut out of the urban space. Let alone the sort of fascinating, geometry of them. It's and so I took the digital shots and then I've painted out the background and the arena. So I mean, I suppose the other thing is that the stadium itself is a space that's got various demarcations in it. So the stands are different to the arena. I see the arena very much as a sort of form of polis. It's where politics happens. Literally on the ground is where politics happens, yeah. And then the stands have got this whole social contract going on, what's going on in there. Elias Canetti makes a lovely description about, in his book Crowds and Power, he talks about the crowd in the ring as opposed to, so for him a natural crowd must always be allowed to grow. So the crowd in the ring is an unnatural crowd because it's got a limitation on how much it can grow. But even more perversely, it looks at itself. So it's a crowd, which doesn't happen in the church. And so this thing about the time frames of we had stadia in ancient times, no stadia, and then they've turned up again. There's this self-referential thing that happens with the crowd in a ring. So you get excited about what's on the arena, but you're also referencing and riffing off the crowd on the other side. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on there, let alone if we start talking about layers within the stadium. So there's stuff that goes on underground. There's still a economy. There's a whole heap of people working physically under a stadium to service the people in the stands or service people above. And then as you go up in the stands, there's a point in the middle where all the rich live, and then after that you get poor again. So it's sort of quite fascinating that layering up. So yeah, I've just noticed the pig video. So this is Plugger's pig, the other pig video. So back in the '93, some larrikins released a pig onto the ground at the Sydney St Kilda game. And in this case, the pig represented not the fat bureaucrat, but the fat full forward, as in Plugger Lockett. And one of the things about this video that I became really conscious of was that he's on the arena, and we've got these stands, but there's this sort of space between the arena and the stands, between the boundary line and the fence, where in Australian rules football, a lot of people live, the interchange bench, all the doctors are in there, all the reporters are in there, half the umpiring staff are in this sort of space. And for that moment, while the pig's on the ground, everyone's allowed to run onto the arena, like that the boundary gets broken down, and all these people in that middle space between the stands and the arena get to freely run on the arena while they chase the pig, basically. So it was it's interesting to me. I think the pig motif is sort of interesting for me, that it can represent a whole heap of different demarcations, but it can also represent a breaking down of some of that. And that's the other play that happens in the stadium.